Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. Welcome back to the GMU program. We're glad to see a lot of folks are here. A little late start today, so thank you for bearing with us. Today, we're going to be going through building a self-service portal in a multi-cloud environment with our old buddy Maher. Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise.
A lot of good content today. It's glad to have you back here. Just as a reminder, we're going to be coming back again week after next. A little bit of a change up in the schedule, but we're going to be touching on some of our vRealize operations for networks content next week, so that'll be good. We'll talk about that at the end of the session. So with that, just as a gentle reminder, if you're unable to make today, or if you're sharing this out to a customer or other interested person, clients, partners, who have you, all of the recordings will be available after the session. So feel free to share those out. They get posted up on the various social channels, whatever you happen to be viewing on right now. So with that, let's go ahead and get rolling. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Anders. Well, welcome everyone. Today's getting more out of is around the build of the self-service portal. So it's going to be all in VMware Aria Automation Service Broker. My name is Mahar Al-Asfar. I'm the Senior Technical Marketing Architect around cloud automation with VMware. So let's kick it off. I have one or two slides I'm going to start with, and then we'll jump into the product. In terms of the session, in terms of what we will learn today, building a self-service portal in Aria Automation, we're going to look at what is VMware Service Broker, how it works. We'll look at adding content to the catalog, setting up policies like approval, lease, and day-to operations, and then look at some things like customizing the item catalog and creating a request form. We'll also take a look at the send email notification to users and how you can customize it. And then finally, look at the user experience in terms of deploying a catalog item from the service broker or the self-service broker. At the end of the session, you'll be able to provide a single point where you can request and manage catalog items, as well as manage the deployed catalog items throughout the deployment lifecycle, in terms of requesting, deleting when you don't need it anymore, etc. VMware Aria Automation, formerly known as vRealize Automation, is a modern multi-cloud infrastructure automation platform, and we've seen this slide in the previous GMU sessions. Enables modern infrastructure automation use cases like building a self-service for multi-cloud, and be able to provision resources and consume multi-cloud with governance. And also it's built from the ground up on the DevOps principle for infrastructure. The component in VMware Aria Automation that we will be focusing on today is the service broker component. In the last two getting more out of session, we looked at the building blocks, and we also looked at all the concepts, different key concepts within the template. So there will be more sessions in the future that we will be driving as advanced use cases, etc. But today our focus is the VMware Aria Automation Service Broker, which aggregates native content from multiple clouds and platforms into a single catalog with tag-based policies. So what is Aria Automation Service Broker? So definitely Aria Automation is going to help organization build that self-service portal in a multi-cloud environment, whether it's VMware-based cloud or native public cloud. It's a simplified and efficient UI, a catalog, if you will, that cloud administrators make or can make available to users. It works or provides as a single point to request and manage for administrators or cloud admin, manage catalog items in terms of how and where these deployments are deployed, with additional governance and control. And I want to double click here on the word additional because in the previous sessions, if you've seen when we were talking about building blocks and the template itself, there was a lot of different governance in terms of when we were working with a VMware Aria assembler, when we were setting these building blocks. And today we will see additional governance and control applied by the service broker. As a cloud administrator, you create the catalog items by importing released VMware Aria Automation templates. So if you create templates and you release them in VMware Aria Automation Assembler, we can use them and add them. They become catalog items. We can add them as content in Service Broker. There's other content sources as well that you can use, and we will take a look at that your users can deploy to your cloud vendor regions or data stores. Now, as a user, you can request and monitor the provisioning process of your deployment, as well as execute day two actions on the deployment, depending on the resource. After the deployment, you manage the deployed catalog items throughout its life cycle. So when you don't need it, you basically delete your deployment and the infrastructure resources it was using. The availability of these catalog items, and this is where the additional governance and control comes in, of the catalog item, the availability of the catalog item is really determined by the project membership of the user. So projects, as we mentioned, I think in the first session, we said that project links the users, the catalog items, and the cloud resources where these catalog items or resources are deployed. So this is the level of governance. The first thing is that when you log into the service broker, based on your project membership, you will see the entitled catalog items that you're allowed to access or request, or services that you can request. The consume tab within the service broker provides a single point for automation service broker consumers. It allows the consumers to access their catalog items for once. As you can see on the screen, we see all the catalog items in our project under the catalog, as well as we can also look at our deployments and the resources within our deployments. And we'll talk more, and we'll see that in a live demo in terms of some of the deployments that we have within our project. Also on the top, I can see like a metering in terms of how many VMs I've deployed, in terms of my resource usage, how many CPU counts am I consuming out of those 36 VM counts, and in terms of the storage and the memory that I'm utilizing. Okay, so before let's jump in right in, and we'll tackle in terms of we've talked about what is Service Broker and how it works, and we'll try to see in terms of, let me just go in here and look at the assembler. So the assembler is what we discussed last time. You would have a number of curated templates. So here I'm going to go in and basically filter on, let's delete those. Let's get them out of the way. And this is all the MOAD, this project called MOAD, and all the templates that I have created in here. So if we take something like the multi-cloud template, we will see in the version history of the template that we have version 15 released. So one of the things in terms of the content that's going to be available in the service broker is that the template would have to be released for it to show up in the content. Now, if we switch to the service broker, which is the start of the session today, I am logged in here as the admin persona. So I'm the cloud admin. And obviously here, I'm going to go in and see a bunch of projects, all projects within my organization, and also all 20 items or 75 items of item catalogs that I can see here. Obviously, when I have the ability here to focus on filter on specific project, I can go and select my demo project here called MOAD, and that's going to reduce my catalog items in terms of what I'm able to see for Project MOAD and all the different curated services. The multi-cloud blueprint that we just saw released, if we actually try to request this, we will see that version 15 is the one that we're working with here in terms of what the users can request. You have the ability to release one or more versions. So 15, 14, for example, would be both available for the user. And this can be for kind of different use cases. So you can use the custom forms and add some text around, hey, if you want a load balancer, use this version. If you don't want the load balancer, for example, use the older version, etc. Or it can be straightforward where 15 is the latest release of the blueprint or the template, and this is what we're making available to the user within the project. Another thing I want to mention here is that because, again, I am logged in here as a cloud admin, I'm able to see the content and policies tab and also the infrastructure tab. Within the CSP or cloud services portal, you have the ability to assign the needed roles, service roles. And in this case here, I have the service broker admin. So I see these two. And if I switch to another browser here, I'm logged in with a user persona. So this is the TMM user, and you can see the experience is a little bit different. So the user, when they first log in, they land on this overview page where it welcomes the user in terms of the consumer experience, and also it gives them an intro into a lot of different key concepts in terms of things like what is a project, what is a catalog, and you're able to either click how do these key concepts work together, or you can click the view definition to give you kind of a diagram and a concept definition explanation in terms of the project. You can see the project here. We can see it holds the users. And this project has access to certain infrastructure cloud zones. And these cloud zones and this project the users are entitled to certain catalog items. And through the governance of Service Broker, we provision our items. And we'll talk more about the governance that's going to be available to us as cloud admins to be able to enforce as users consume these services or consume the catalog items. And then at the end, the provisioned items, whether they're applications or single machine deployments, will be the resources that the user uses. And if you scroll down, you'll see descriptions of each of those key concepts that we mentioned. So I'm going to just close that. Another thing here on the overview page, you will also see the project that you're a member of. So, and users can be part of multiple projects. So it just happened for this user that we're logged in with here, that we're part of the MOAD project. Also on the right-hand side, we have links to the API documentation, also a link to download the CLI and to deploy and manage your infrastructure as well. Second thing here is that we have also access to the catalog. And because I am a member of one project, really there's no point of filtering on my project. But if I had multiple projects, as you can see, I don't see other people projects or other item catalogs that belongs to other projects within the organization. In the catalog, we can see that I'm entitled to 10 different items, and my resource usage at the moment is 0 VMs, 0 CPU counts, because I have not deployed any resources or requested any of those services as the TMM user I'm logged in with. Okay, so I'll switch gear back to the cloud admin persona, and we'll take a look at some of the content and policies and where does this all start. First, we have to make sure that to create a content source. And a content source provides the template that actually appears in the catalog. So if we actually click new, we can see that there are 7 different type of content that we can actually add as a content source, starting with extensibility actions. And these are action-based extensibility. And we will be talking more about extensibility actions later in the getting more out of series. But if there is an ABX action using, let's say, Python or Node.js or even PowerShell, a script that I've created to deliver a specific use case, I can come in and add the content source as an extensibility and basically get the actions from a specific project where these actions were created. The second one here in the list is AWS CloudFormation template. If you are working with AWS today and have already a native CloudFormation template that you want to expose to your consumers, you can go in and actually specify the name. Obviously, they have to be stored in an S3 bucket for AWS. Provide the bucket name and the bucket access. And whether this is, and then the account, the deployment account in terms of what region and what subscription, AWS subscription account do you want to leverage to create this content and bring in those CloudFormation template. This allows us to use Service Broker to entitle these content once they're added here to our projects, and then apply things like leasing or multi-level approvals, etc., and what day two actions they can actually perform on. The third one is Orchestrator content source. And this is, again, ability for us to bring workflows from the extensibility appliance that is attached to our Aria Automation SaaS org, and allows us to, for example, go in and say, hey, I want to bring in this workflow that I built. Obviously, here we're using, like, let's say you can leverage all the built-in library of workflows that ships with the Aria Orchestrator. And you can select the create or one or more workflows that you want to add, and then assign that and entitle that to certain projects once you add them. And this allows us to do things like, hey, I'm creating X as a service catalog item. So the service broker is not necessarily to provision infrastructure, if you will, but if I've created a workflow that onboards a new employee to the organizations, and the workflow goes through all the steps and stages or different stages that the new employee that joins the organization have to go through, like create an email, make an API call to Exchange, for example, to create a mailbox, make an API call to Active Directory. All the manager has to do is fill a few inputs that the workflow is expecting, and then create a series of automated actions for our new employee. The fourth one here is VRA 7, and VRA 7, as a lot of you know, is end of support, I think, and this is going to disappear at one point. But this was a way for us to, for customers who still or were still using VRA 7, ability to bring those VRA 7 into VRA or Aria Automation 8 or Aria Automation SaaS as a kind of a workaround until these blueprints are kind of moved over or recreated using the new version of Aria Automation. Pipeline is really Aria Automation pipeline. So if you've created a pipeline, and we will talk about Aria Automation pipeline in other sessions, but if there's a pipeline that you've created that promotes code from development to production, you're able to bring in the pipeline content from a specific project where you created that pipeline into Service Broker. So it's a content that you can entitle and also apply governance on. Template is really the what we are going to be showcasing here, and the template is really the Aria Automation Assembler template, which we talked about on the GMU session last time. In terms of you build a service or you build a two-tier application, and then you bring that two-tier application. So if we click templates, we can specify which project we want to import the template from, and then obviously we will only be importing templates that are released in Aria Automation Assembler, right? And then the last one here is automation, and this is if we want to, just like the VRA 7 catalog items, automation brings, and this is if you have the enterprise licensing for the federated catalog. So if you have multiple VRA 8 on-prem instances, you can bring content from these instances into, for example, the federated catalog on Aria Automation SaaS, for example, and I can bring a specific and select content from various on-prem instances of Aria Automation on-prem and bring them into a centralized federated catalog if this is something that I am interested in. What I want to look at here is basically the MOAD template. So we see we already have a content source for Project MOAD, and we have 10 different number of items. And this was the last import that was done. So if we actually take a look at this, we will see that we gave it a name called MOAD, and the source project that we're importing the templates from is, so I can simply say validate to make sure that project and content source validate successfully and found 10 released items. And then I'm going to save it and import. The minute I do that, it will bring the content under the content menu item for us, and then we can interact. And you can see here I have 67 different items. So if I just for sake of search type the word my project, because all the content item that I have starts with the project name MOAD. So if we take a look at, for example, the MOAD multi-cloud blueprint, you can see I've assigned an icon. So if I click on, say, configure item, you can see that I've changed the item to represent the application. You also can set the maximum instances per request. And this is a limit that you can define that has a maximum of 10 deployments allowed within one deployment. But what this allows you to do is set the limit on the maximum number of deployments that can be created per the request. So you can actually create 10 different deployments from the same blueprint if that's something that you wanted to configure specifically for a specific service that you've created. The other thing is we've recently released the ability to create multiple custom forms. So if we actually search again on MOAD again and we'll go back to the MOAD multi-cloud, click the double arrows, you can see the released item that we've released in the assembler. And this was the creation time. So here I have the ability to create a customized form, or start with a custom form that I've created from before. So here I can go through all the different custom form that myself or my colleagues created, and maybe use that at a starting point if there is like a template of some sort. Or if I want to create a brand new custom form. And really, custom forms is a way for cloud admins to simplify the user experience for the users. So instead of having all these fields and inputs required by the template in one page, I might want to group them in different tabs and say, for example, this is VM details, this is application details tab, this is the cost center tab. So I can make these tabs, or even number them like step 1, step 2, step 3, until all these inputs, whether they're mandatory or optional, are fulfilled, and then the user can select submit to go through. So the nice thing about this is that as of the April release, we are able now to create multiple versions of these custom forms for a released catalog item. So what that means, I can go in and create multiple custom forms for the same version, or create so it can be one-to-one. Before it was one-to-one. Today I can create a custom form, and within this custom form I may have more than one version history in terms of so as I mature and modify my original template in Aria Automation Assembler, I can go in and use the old form if I want to, and even add the additional properties that I've added as I mature my service. All right, so next in the content, so we have the content here, and the next step for us is, once these content are available and under our management, as you can see, we are listing all the imported templates, whether they're coming from Aria Automation templates, or extensibility action, or federated, on-prem Aria Automation instances. We can go to the policies, and this is where governance, or the additional governance, starts. Now, this is there are 5 different policies or 6 different policies that you can select from, and starting with the content sharing policy. The content sharing policy is the way cloud admin can say, I want the following content to be exposed or to be allowed to this project. So if we go and check one of the sharing policy we have for Project Moad, you'll see that I'm simply giving it a name, and the scope here is Moad. And then these are the added items that I've decided to add to all the users member of Project Moad. So when they log in into Service Broker, they'll be able to access these and if there's one, for example, that I want to remove, I can simply remove it from the policy, and then the users of the project will no longer be able to access that catalog items. Now, there's a really nice share option at the bottom of the policy here. If you want the content to be shared with all the user equally, then you check this box and you simply don't worry about this. So this is where you can share the content with all the users and groups defined at the project level. You can, though, select individual users and groups if there are different groups within the project that you want to. So if you create a specific policy and you're saying, for example, I want to search for user um, for a specific user, like this user, and this user would be the cloud admin would have only defined these users on the project level. So we look up these users, and we can create different policies. So if there is a specific item I want this user to see, I can create a policy and pick and choose what group and what user from Project Moad that's going to get entitled to one or more. Maybe you have to a manager in the same group or in the same project, like let's say the project lead, and he have an extra item that the other project users don't have. So you can create a separate content sharing policy, and then you can uncheck and explicitly select the users or the group that you want to entitle. So right now for our project here, it's super simple. I want everybody in the project Moad to have access to these 9 items. All right, next policy to look at here from an importance perspective is the approval policy. And the approval policy, the experience in creating a policies is all the same. So there's a scope, a criteria, and then all depends on your business needs and use cases. So the approval policy here really controls who must agree to a deployment or day to action before the request is provisioned. So here we can give this a name, and then we can set this on an org level. That means this policy might affect multiple projects. So you may have an approval on everything, and then that's basically whether there's no explicit project. So it's gonna any project that gets created in the future will automatically inherit this approval policy, right? So you can do it on an org level, applying the policy to all or selection of project to target multiple project. You have to select the project scope if there's a specific project that I'm creating this policy for, and this is what most customer would basically do. Pick our project and then set our criteria. The criteria can be, something that you would set to trigger when to trigger this policy. So there is different clause that you can choose from. It might be for specific templates. When we say template, that means somebody already requested the template to deploy the template from the assembler. And if that template is released, it becomes a catalog item. So depending on if the criteria is for a template or a catalog item, you can choose the right type of clause here, or you can say, okay, if the deployment creation cost greater than this much, for example, I need certain groups or users to approve the deployment because it's greater than X amount. Or it can be based on a specific deployment. So if the deployment equals any of the deployment names, that would be a criteria, or owned by, owner type, requested by, and specific resources. And this is also becomes handy because if the resources has, and this is what's going to go, and this is going to give me the option to start looking at resources as a criteria. So for example, if the resources requested has a CPU count of greater than this much, 8 CPUs, trigger, and then you can do also or and. So in terms of like if the CPU count or the memory, here we can say something else like, for example, the memory is more than let's say 496, greater than 4 gig. That means it's any of those if any of those condition exist, it'll be the criteria. If I say and, that means both, as you guys know, would have to be true for the criteria to be enforced. Next, the approver mode can be any or all. So that means who's going to approve. So when you add users and group as the approver, you can select, okay, any of the member of the users that I've added here, or any of the member of the groups that I've added here can potentially approve, or everybody in the group. So if you have a security group with like 1,000 people, all the 1,000 people has to go in, and they will get an email notification, and they will have to approve before the approval goes to provision the application, for example, or the infrastructure that the user requested. Okay, what happens if the auto expire decision? So if the auto expire trigger here is set to a specific number of days, if we set this to 5, and when the 5 days go by and nobody approved or disapproved, completely forgotten, or we're too busy to approve it. So what do? Do we automatically approve it, or do we automatically reject it? And this is something that you can also control in case something was triggered for approval and it was forgotten and nobody noticed. So do you want to automatically approve that or not? And then at the end of the approval is, what are you triggering approval for? So this could be cloud requests. So if we type request here, or just cloud, and these are all the different actions that we can trigger approval on. So if there is something that you want to create, that, for example, deleting EC2 instance or powering off a machine in production, which you really don't want to do. So we can actually list these actions and set approvals as well for it, as well as the really main ones, like, for example, as a start would be to request the machine. So if we actually show all here to make our life easier, and if we scroll down, we can see all the 115 different day 2 actions that we can take. And right, so these are all the different actions that you can set in the policy. If we give you like an example of the approval policy we have in this one here, so we have a an approval policy. So we can see that this approval policy has been created on a project level for Project Corp. And the criteria is anytime the template equals this template name, go ahead and use an approval policy for it. Also, one thing I forgot to mention, really important, is the approval policy has an approval levels. If you're only contained with having a 1 level approval, you can set this to 1, but the level defines the order in which the policy is enforced. So you can have, for example, multiple level approvals. So for example, let's say level 1 gets approved first by the manager, and then level 2 maybe would have to go to finance. So it gets approved based on your budget And you can, go from 1 to 99 different levels on the approval level. So if you only want a single approval, set this to 1, and if you want multiple approvals, you can define the number of approvals you want, and you can set that as you wish. The approval types can be user based, as we were doing here, and we can add users from our project scope based on what we select, or we can do role based. So role based would be, hey, am I giving access to project administrators, or I'm giving access to project supervisors, etc. So you can use role based or access, or user based or role based. Hopefully, that's give you a good kind of introduction into what the approval policy can be used for, to request items, catalog items, or template, and it can be also for day 2 actions. The second one we want to discuss now is the leasing policy, and the leasing policy defines a constraint on the maximum amount of time that a deployment can exist. And there's 2 phases to this. So the first thing is that when it expires, or the maximum amount is reached, the deployment would expire. That means it will turn off the VMs within the deployment. Then we have a grace period. This grace period will define the number of days that these VMs will stay turned off. Once the grace period is reached, then VRA will come in, or Aria Automation will come in and destroys the deployment, and the resources are reclaimed. So after the creating or modifying the policy, it takes sometimes for these enforcement to take a few minutes, and then so just be aware of that. So really straightforward. The type is lease. We give it a name. And the scope, again, very similar to the approval policy. It can be on an org level if you want to apply this lease policy company-wide or org-wide, organization-wide. Basically, it's going to affect multiple projects, or you want to create it for specific projects. And also, once you can also click the criteria so here we can say anything coming from, or requested by, or deployment called, or template used, etc. Apply this lease policy. So I might have specific templates. Again, templates being deployed from VMware Aria Automation Assembler, catalog items, which is deployed from Aria Automation Service Broker. So depending on what the criteria is, I can define when to trigger this policy. The enforcement type can be hard or soft. Hard meaning ranked higher than soft policies. And soft policies are overridden by hard policies. This is super helpful if you have some policies on an org level that they're set to soft. And then you can override them by having hard policies on a project level. So if something that is a project that no policy has been created for a project level, the organizational soft project will enforce. But if there is explicit policies defined by the project owner or the project administrator, and those are set to type hard, it will override any soft policies on the defined on the org level. So hopefully that's. And then the maximum lease in terms of number of days, in terms of the days of deployment that can exist without being renewed. So you can set how many days you want. Can a user continue to use this deployment? And then there's an example here. For example, if the lease is 30 days and the maximum total lease is 100, so you can say this is the maximum. 100 is the maximum days, and the grace period is 5. And the user never renews the lease. The deployment is destroyed at 30 days plus the 5 days grace period mentioned in the policy. There is really a great link here that links you to the documentation that breaks down all these fields. The idea here is that the maximum, I can set this, for example, for a deployment that if somebody, a developer, for example, requests a new machine, it'll be available to him for 7 days. But I might say, okay, you can renew this deployment, and you have a maximum total release leasing of 100. So they can continue renewing the lease. The user can continue to renew the lease for this policy up to 100 days. So once they reach 100 days, there's no way to renew. They would have to request delete the deployment and request a new one. And if they leave it, it'll go into the grace period. And if the grace period again set to 30, when they no longer be able to renew the lease after hitting the 100 limit, the VMs will be turned off, and then after 30 days, VRA will destroy the deployment and reclaim the resources. All right. Next, we have a deployment limit policy. And this is if you have like a use case where you want to create a deployment limit policy so you can control the amount of resources that can be used by a deployment. And if you don't have any deployment limits defined, all the resources at the deployment level are available for users to consume. But if you want to actually create a policy, add at least one limit where you can define the limits for the whole deployment. So if we actually go through, we provide a name, we provide the scopes again, whether it's an org level or a project level, and what criteria we want to use to trigger this policy. And we simply can select from CPU, VM count, memory and storage, and enter a limit for our deployments. If I want to do limits on the resource level, then I can come in under the deployment resource limits and add specific limits, give it a name, for example, set a criteria for it as well, and pick the CPU memory on the resources. So this will be enforced on the deployment level. So if you have a deployment that has 5 different resources, like 5 different machines, it will apply on all the machines because it's defined on the deployment level. Or you can create that deployment resource limits within the policy, so it doesn't apply really on the deployment limit, but with the resources within. Okay, so next here we have day 2 action policies. And the day 2 action policies, if there's no day 2 action defined, which is really the default, when you actually go to any deployment, you will see all the day 2 operations. So for example, if we go in and filter on our project, we already filtered here, and go to some of the deployments we have. And if I go in and click, for example, on AWS, let me select SCC, for example, here. You will see all the available day 2 actions on the deployment level. So here you can say we can change the lease, we can change the owner, we can delete the deployment and everything it contains. We can edit the deployment to change the name and the description, for example. We can edit the tags, power it off, which power off everything that's contained in here, or do an iterative update if there's a new version of the template that was initially used to provision this. And also on the VM itself, when we go on the day 2 actions, we can see all the day 2 actions. We see the reason we see all the day 2 actions because there's no default policy for day 2 actions created. But the minute you create a day 2 action policy, you will only see what the policy enforces. So this is where the day 2 policy comes into place. So if there's certain day 2 actions that I want to give a specific group of users, so when they actually go into the component and click on day 2 actions, they can see I can go in and actually look at all the different actions that I can, depending on the object name, whether this is for AWS or Azure or GCP or vSphere based infrastructure. And there's like a lot of different actions that I want maybe to explicitly allow and everything else will be explicitly not allowed. If we go through the field, give it a name, select the scope, whether it's on an org level, enforced on an org level or a project level, the criteria in terms of when do you want this day to action. So it could be for a specific blueprint, if you will. The entitlement type, again, can be role-based, or it can be user-based, where you can add individual users or groups in terms of who this will apply to. And then the action really that you want to apply or allow. Like, for example, let's say I want power related. So I can select, for example, the power on, but not the power off. So I can choose power on EC2, power on Azure, power on GCP, etc. If that's something that I want to create it. If those are the day two actions I want to entitle my users. The final policy here that we're going to touch on is the resource quota policy. And this controls the amount of resources that can be consumed by either each user, project, or an organization. It really depends on how you configure it. Based on the scope, again, similar things. And then this is really where the value of this policy comes into place in terms of the resource quota. When you click Add, you can select the scope level if you want this to be a resource quota on a project level or a resource quota on the project user level. So let's explore both. So if I select project limits, I can select the resource that I want. CPU can be CPU, VM count, memory, and storage, and set that limit on the and this will be a policy that will be set on the project limit. I can also, and then I can basically add that and then click add again, and then maybe do a project user limit. When I do project user limit, again, I'm presented with CPU memory, and this is going to be on user to user or user basis versus project basis, if you will. Again, depending on where you want to define the limit. So the resource limit here applies to the total usage of the resource within the scope level limit that you choose. So if I select project limit, the resource limit will apply to the total usage by the project. If I select project user, the resource limit will apply on the project on user to user basis. So this would basically cover all 6 different policies that we went through. And then one nice enforcement there in the menu here will tell you the audit in terms of which policies applied using the policy enforcement list. And these event remains in the list for 100 days before, a new one replaces them. So if you want to be doing an audit here, to see, for example, on this date, resource name was create snapshot, and MOAD content sharing policy, that was what it called, and we removed the items. So anything that you do within the policies or relating to policy will be audited here in terms of policies were applied using policy enforcement lists. Scenarios. This is where you can come in and actually enable or disable notifications. So notifications is customized scenario-based notification in terms of when do you want to go out and notify a customer of a specific scenario. So we have 10 different scenarios here. We have scenarios when the deployment lease expire, when the deployment lease is expiring. So it hasn't expired yet, but it's going to. Approved, rejected in terms of deployments, request approved, rejected by the approval groups or the approving users. Deployment request waiting on approval, so notification set to the requester. Pending approval, pending work items, and then work item answered or rejected. Every single one of these, like depending on your what you need your users to be notified on, can be toggled on or off by the cloud admin. And in addition to that, you can actually customize the branding and customize the content of the email. So there's two things here. The first thing is the shared branding. So I can go in and actually edit the header and the footer, apply to all notifications. So I don't have to go every single, scenario and change. And this is where I can go and change the color. This is a standard HTML style code where I can go in and select my HTML colors and the for background. And in terms of if I want to see a preview, I can simply click and it's going to look, for example, you can look at the footer of what you want, your copyrights, or the header and the back end and the for and the the logo, etc. of the for the header and the footer. And the header and the footer have two separate tabs that I can control here in terms of what I want to see in the preview. And if you don't like how it looked at the end, you can always reset the default, and it'll get you back started where you back to where you started, and be able to try again, if you will. And this is going to edit the shared header and footer applied to all the notification. All right, so now if we want to customize the email body for the individual notification template, this is where we can come into a specific scenario and click on the double arrow and be able to customize. So here, let's say if I want to change the subject line or anything in the body itself, this is where I can go and click customize, and it's going to take us to the edit page within the scenario itself. And again, this is HTML, and I can scroll down and pick the specific section where I want to do. So if we take a look, for example, on the lease expired, you can see double curly bracket deployment name. And if I go at the end of the line, and let's say this is basically saying lease expired, and it's going to inject the deployment name, and it's going to say the deployment will be deleted. And if you want to insert anything out, you can always look at the dynamic attributes. There will be more scenario attributes. So if we expand scenario attributes and click on property, we will see a list of things, for example, that we can inject either in the subject line or in the body of the email itself, right? So here we have the name, so I can copy the property path to the clipboard. So if I do that, and let's say come here at the end of the line and paste it, so it's going to say curly bracket deployment dot name. So go to the deployment payload and return the name of the deployment, just exactly what we did here. So I can delete that and look at another property. Remaining lease, for example, might be a good idea to actually put in into here. And if we scroll actually within the body itself, you can see that we're already doing deployment name here in bold, expired, and it will be deleted in, and then we have deployment dot remaining grace period. So we're returning the remaining grace period, which is this property here. So if I go ahead and look at the preview of this email, you can see, for example, I have the lease of the deployment, name of the deployment is going to show up here. And then if you are a consumption user, click here to see the deployment. If you're an assembler user. So one thing you don't see here is the remaining period, because this is a sample preview, but in the actual email, and because the property of the deployment remaining grace period is mentioned here, because the preview is really looking, and this is an active payload for an actual deployment when the event happens, and only then it will be it'll be shown, but it won't be shown in the preview. Just actually no, as if I scroll down here, yeah, it doesn't show because this is again just a template, but it will show in the actual email. So if you want to do that, you can always go in and cancel out of this. And once you actually do the customization and you want to test it, you can send a test and you can send it to whoever, any email address to see if the notification customization is up to your liking. Okay, so let's go ahead and before we take a look at the deployment. So we talked about adding content to the catalog via the content sources. We've set up policies. We looked at the customization of the icon and request form. And we looked at also at the send email notification. One also thing here in the consume tab, the user or the developer or the consumer can look at their deployments, as we mentioned, for the project that they're a member of. They can apply day two actions on them or day two actions within the components. But also we can see the resources. And this is a great enhancement where you can filter on the resources you're interested in seeing. Imagine you have hundreds or thousands of resources that belongs to the project you're a member of. So you can say, okay, well, I want to go and just show me, for example, AWS managed provisioning or deployment that went against the cloud type AWS. So it lists them for you. The cloud accounts, and these are the account names, or maybe specific tags that you wanna filter based on. So there's a lot of different resources and filtering that you can use, or if this is deployed or discovered, and then maybe you only want to see billable resources only, right? So it's something that would consume licenses, and this is what would be nice for like metering. So this is a way to go in the resources and use the filtering. The other type of filtering, I would say, and or grouping, I would say, not this is filtering, this is grouping, is what do I want to see in here? So all is all, of course, and if I only want virtual machines, then I would click this. If I only want networks or gateways or load balancer or security group, depending on and what you want to display here, you can do that. If you only want to see virtual machines, you can go to the virtual machines, and that's going to from the menu, and that's going to filter or group only the virtual machines. You can also take day two actions on some of these virtual machines from here, as if you have obviously you have access. So instead of going to the deployment and opening the deployment and going to the component, I can just go and find my component that I'm interested in and go and apply my day two actions on it. And if I expand the or click the double arrow key, I can get all type of information in terms, what deployment this is part of, what's the state of the VM, what IP address it has, etc., and all different information. And even for example, in this case, this was provisioned and there was a cloud init portion in terms, and this is the code that was deployed on the VM. And here's all the custom properties associated with the resource. Very, very, very helpful. A section for volumes, and then for all the storage, and then networking and security at the end here. Okay, so that would be the end of our getting more out of today. Hope it was informational, informative, and helped kind of give you an idea of what is service broker and how it works and how easy it is to actually add content and entitle that content and apply governance on top of that to all your users within the organization. All right, so hopefully, let me just take a look quick. I guess Scott and Michael, thank you for taking care of the Q&A. And I don't see any outstanding Q&A in the comments, at least on my side. Therefore, thank you for everybody for attending and watching. And if you've seen the recording, one thing I want to remind everybody before we close the session, that the next session is going to be around application discovery simplified with Aria operations for networks. This is going to be on the 25th of May with my colleague Matt Just. So the session will be about if you have several applications or multiple tiers in an application, creating application using the public APIs or the user interface becomes a long process. Join us on the 25th of May to see how Aria operations for networks auto discovers applications and tiers and enables you to add them automatically, reducing manual effort. And if you got to this point, please go ahead and scan the QR code on the screen. You will be, this is part of the VMware Reward and Champions points for merchandise for watching today's webinar, whether you watched it live or through the recording. And once you're prompted, the answer to the question is going to be Cadence. Where to go for more content? Getting more resources on our Tech Zone, administering Aria Automation hands-on lab 2201, or our cloud management VMware Aria Automation YouTube channel and blog sites. With that, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next one.